Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today we are going to talk about most haunted case that is also investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren. Stick till the end for complete info. Some said it was just kids seeking attention. But when police officers, neighbors, journalists, and even hardened skeptics stood witness to furniture flying, voices coming from nowhere, and a family spiraling into chaos, denial became harder to hold on to. This is the real story behind the Conjuring 2, one of the most documented and terrifying paranormal cases in British history, the Enfield Poltergeist. The Hodgson family home at 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London, was where it all began. In the summer of 1977, Peggy Hodgson, a single mother raising 4 children, Margaret, 13, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7, began to notice strange things happening around the house. Furniture moved on its own. Knocking sounds echoed from the walls, but it wasn't until August 30th that everything took a chilling turn. That night, Peggy heard a loud crash from upstairs. She rushed into the bedroom shared by Janet and Johnny and found a heavy chest of drawers blocking the door. When she pushed it back into place, it slid right back in front of the door on its own, as if some unseen force was trying to trap them inside. The family fled the house and ran to the neighbors, terrified. The police were called. When they arrived, 2 officers entered the house to investigate. What they saw would become a cornerstone of the case. One officer, WPC Carolyn Heaps, witnessed a chair slide across the floor without any visible cause. It was officially documented in her police report, one of the few times such paranormal phenomena were recognized in a legal document. In the following days, the activity escalated. Loud knocks, bangs, and scratching sounds plagued the home, often centered around Janet, the middle daughter. Items would vanish and reappear elsewhere. Toys hurled themselves across the room. A Bible was found shredded. The family was being torn apart mentally, physically, and emotionally. The Society for Psychical Research, SPR, became involved, sending investigators Maurice Grosse and later Lyon Playfair to document the events. Grosse, whose daughter had recently died in a motorcycle accident, was emotionally drawn to the Hodgsons. He began staying in the house and witnessed numerous disturbing events. Recordings were made, cameras were installed, yet the occurrences defied explanation. Janet, in particular, seemed to be the focus. She levitated not once but multiple times, witnessed by neighbors, and even captured in a now famous series of photographs taken by a camera set on a time-lapse timer. In one, Janet appears mid-air, her body thrown from her bed, as if by some invisible force. Skeptics later argued she had jumped, but the sequence of the photographs suggested otherwise. There was no run-up, no motion blur, typical of a leap. But the strangest part was the voice. A deep, guttural male voice began to speak through Janet. It called itself Bill Wilkins. Just before I died, I went blind, and then I had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep and died in the chair in the corner.
Downstairs? That's what the voice said. The investigators recorded it.
They tested Janet's vocal cords. Doctors confirmed the voice was produced while her throat remained relaxed, something nearly impossible for a child her age to do. When they researched the name Bill Wilkins, they found that a man by that name had indeed lived and died in the house. His son confirmed the story matched what had happened. Still, critics insisted it was a hoax. Janet and Margaret admitted to faking a few incidents, later claiming they were pressured by journalists and overwhelmed by the attention, but insisted that the vast majority of events were genuine. Maurice Grosse remained convinced despite the controversy. Over 180 hours of audio recordings were captured. Tapes revealed knocking patterns that responded to questions, eerie whistling, barking sounds, and that chilling male voice. A metal grating embedded in a fireplace was wrenched free with no visible means. A curtain wrapped itself around Janet's neck while she slept. Playfair later said, "I have no doubt that the family was being manipulated by forces beyond our understanding." The media frenzy only grew. Reporters camped outside the house. The Daily Mirror sent photographers who, despite initial skepticism, witnessed and captured phenomena. The BBC brought in a crew, and although their camera equipment mysteriously malfunctioned, tapes were erased, equipment failed, some footage survived. During one session, Janet was placed in a room with a microphone and separated by glass. She spoke in the Bill Wilkins voice for hours. A child, barely 12, holding an entire conversation in a tone and cadence completely foreign to her own. Even skeptic Joe Nickell, who later dismissed the case as a hoax, admitted there were aspects that could not be readily explained. The most damning evidence for skeptics came from moments where the girls were allegedly caught bending spoons, hiding tape recorders, or causing small disturbances themselves. But even those who believed some events were faked argued that a genuine haunting had occurred, and the children, overwhelmed by the stress and chaos, may have occasionally tried to recreate phenomena when things went quiet. This theory aligns with many other poltergeist cases where genuine disturbances are sometimes followed by human embellishment due to psychological strain or pressure. What makes the Enfield case unique is not just the volume of witnesses. Over 30 people, including police officers, neighbors, journalists, and paranormal researchers, but the breadth of phenomena. Objects flew across rooms, cold spots plagued certain areas of the house, doors opened and slammed by themselves. A neighbor reported hearing Janet screaming, only to find her entangled in a curtain with a chair knocked over beside her. The incidents weren't confined to nighttime. Many took place in broad daylight. Janet was sent to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. Doctors found no evidence of mental illness or possession. Yet the phenomena continued even while she was away. That suggests the haunting wasn't purely centered on her, although she was its primary target. Over the course of 2 years, the activity gradually declined. By 1979, it had all but stopped. The family moved on, though Janet always said something evil had lived in the house. In adulthood, she remained mostly private, but in later interviews, she confirmed, "It was real. I know what I saw. I know what happened." In 2016, The Conjuring 2 dramatized the events, inserting Ed and Lorraine Warren into a central role. In reality, their involvement was minimal. They visited once, uninvited, and were turned away. But the core of the case, the voice, the levitations, the furniture movements, and the terror of the Hodgson family remains one of the most chilling in paranormal history. What makes the Enfield Poltergeist so compelling is not just its duration or intensity, but the documentation. Tape recordings, police statements, eyewitness accounts. It's a haunting that left a paper trail. And even today, decades later, no one has been able to definitively explain what happened at 284 Green Street. Some call it a hoax, others a cry for help. But to those who were there, who lived it, who heard the knocking in the walls and saw a little girl lifted by invisible hands, it was something else, something dark, something real. After the events of late August 1977, the Hodgson house had become the most talked about property in London. The press camped outside, neighbors murmured in disbelief, but for Peggy Hodgson and her children, especially Janet, it was a living nightmare that didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Janet, the 11-year-old girl at the center of the haunting, was being tormented in ways that would soon shake even the most hardened skeptics. During the night, she would speak in a gravelly voice not her own, a voice that claimed to be Bill, a man who had died in the house years prior. But the voice was not whispered or performed. It came from deep within her chest, and multiple. Speech pathologists and medical experts were brought in to analyze it. One such expert, a voice specialist named Dr. Peter Fenwick, later stated that it would be almost impossible for a child to produce such a tone without causing vocal cord damage. But Janet, despite hours of speaking in this voice, showed no signs of strain. The recordings of this voice, chilling, guttural, and disturbingly articulate, became one of the central pieces of evidence for those defending the case's authenticity. But the voice was just the start. Furniture continued to move in full view of witnesses. Heavy chests of drawers slid across the floor unaided, a fireplace ripped from the wall, marbles and toys thrown by invisible hands, and all of it witnessed, not only by the family, but by journalists, police officers, and researchers. Among the most prominent were Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair of the Society for Psychical Research. Grosse, whose own daughter had died not long before, became deeply invested in the Hodgson case, viewing it almost as a personal mission. He and Playfair took turns monitoring the house, staying overnight with tape recorders running and notebooks at hand. They logged hundreds of incidents, some minor, like a door closing or a light flickering, and others that defied logic entirely. One night, while Maurice Grosse sat in the living room, he and another witness saw Janet levitate, hovering horizontally, then being thrown across the room as if by unseen arms. On another occasion, Janet was found tangled in the curtain rod above her bed as if she had been hurled there. And this wasn't something claimed in whispers, it was photographed. The famous images of Janet midair were captured by a camera that had been set to take photos at regular intervals through the night. Some skeptics argued she had simply jumped from her bed, but those who reviewed the sequence of photos noted that her posture was unnatural, her body rigid and extended in ways inconsistent with normal jumping or falling. Still, skepticism ran rampant. In December of 1977, Janet and her sister Margaret were filmed by hidden cameras placed by investigators. The footage showed them bending spoons and attempting to manipulate objects themselves. That single event was enough to seed widespread doubt in the press, but even Lyon Playfair, despite seeing that deception, argued that while some instances were clearly staged, the majority were not. There were times, Playfair later said, when Janet was clearly playing around. But there were far more times when things happened that she simply couldn't have done. That fine line between childhood mischief and true paranormal activity made the case deeply controversial. Yet the phenomena continued. Cold spots were recorded throughout the house. Objects vanished and reappeared in other rooms. Toys still in their boxes would suddenly activate, spinning, flashing, or singing when no one was near. At one point, a large iron fireplace was found ripped from the wall, something a child couldn't physically accomplish alone. These physical occurrences were often accompanied by emotional strain. Peggy, the mother, began showing signs of severe fatigue and
stress.
She lost weight. She stopped sleeping. Neighbors said she aged visibly during that year. The children too became withdrawn, Janet most of all. At school, she struggled to stay awake. Teachers reported she would fall asleep mid-class, twitching and murmuring as if still tormented even in dreams. The emotional weight of the events was beginning to fracture the family. In January of 1978, the case took an even darker turn. During one session, the Bill voice emerged again, and when questioned, claimed he had died in a chair in the very corner of the room they were sitting in. Investigators checked public records and, astonishingly, found that a man named Bill Wilkins had in fact died in the house years prior, blind, brain hemorrhage, sitting in a chair in that precise spot. His son, Terry Wilkins, was located and confirmed the details. This moment became a turning point. The information was never shared with the family prior. Janet, who couldn't have known it, now seemed to be channeling something or someone with real, verifiable history. For skeptics, it was a puzzle. For believers, it was proof. But with that confirmation came escalation. Janet began entering what could only be described as trances, periods where she would stare blankly, her eyes unfocused, and speak in tongues or in voices not her own. At times, she was physically attacked, scratches appearing on her arms, bruises that seemed to form overnight. There were nights when the house would shake violently, enough for neighbors to come knocking, asking if something had exploded inside. During one especially terrifying evening, the kitchen lights shattered while the family was eating dinner. A glass flew across the room, cutting Peggy's hand. Objects didn't just move, they attacked. The press had mostly moved on by then, weary of the case's inconsistencies and rumors of fraud. But Grosse and Playfair remained. They stayed on for over a year, logging over 2,000 incidents, capturing hours of audio recordings and pages of witness accounts. They believed that even if some events were exaggerated or faked by the girls in moments of boredom or stress, there was a core truth to what they experienced, something no one could easily explain. In the summer of 1978, after more than a year of near-constant disturbances, the activity began to wane. Janet was sent to a special school. A priest was called in to bless the house. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. By autumn, the poltergeist seemed to retreat. The family remained in the house for years after, and while minor activity was reported on occasion, it never returned with the same violent force. Janet herself later gave interviews, acknowledging that yes, she and Margaret had faked a few moments to see if anyone would notice. But she stood by her story that the majority of the events were real. "It wasn't just us," she said. "So many people saw it. So many things happened that we couldn't have done. We didn't want it. We were just kids." Decades later, when asked what she remembered most, Janet's answer wasn't the levitations or the voices. It was the fear. "People forget," she said, how scared we were, how no one believed us, how we felt like we were being used by the media, by the investigators, and by whatever it was that was in that house. As the months progressed, so did the layers of complexity. The media attention brought more than just reporters. Skeptics and opportunists arrived, mingling with curious locals and researchers alike. Some claimed to see nothing. Others claimed to hear whispers when no one was speaking. Janet and Margaret underwent countless hours of observation, questioning, and in some cases ridicule. Janet's experiences intensified, levitations, episodes, of being thrown across the room, and spontaneous trances where her voice would deepen and a rasping, guttural male voice would speak through her. That voice, identifying itself as Bill Wilkins, became one of the most disturbing elements of the case. It was recorded numerous times by Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, both of whom worked extensively on the case. Bill claimed he had lived and died in the house, having passed away in the chair downstairs from a brain hemorrhage. When his death was later confirmed via historical records, it gave pause even to hardened skeptics. Though some critics pointed out that Janet might have overheard those details somehow, no one could quite explain how an 11-year-old girl could mimic such an aged voice for long stretches under observation, or why she would. At one point, Janet was placed in a hospital for several days of monitoring. Even away from her home, the disturbances followed. Hospital staff reported furniture moving on its own, strange knocking, and electrical failures around her. All this under strict observation, without family or press around. It was during this time that even doctors noted her stress levels and the possibility of trauma-induced manifestations. But what trauma causes objects to fly or voices to boom from nowhere? Grosse and Playfair became increasingly convinced that the events were genuine. Their notes were meticulous, documenting everything from the temperatures of rooms during events to the exact times of occurrences. They recorded metal bending, chairs tilting without pressure, and eerie moans echoing through walls. Janet once went missing in the house, only to be found moments later, locked inside a cupboard that had been nailed shut from the outside. No one could explain how she got there. And the voice of Bill continued to speak. He was angry, confused, and hostile. He spoke of death, of being trapped, of not wanting to leave. While some believed this was merely ventriloquism or psychological projection, recordings were made using voice frequency analyzers. The results showed vocal patterns inconsistent with Janet's age or range and impossible to maintain for long durations by someone her size and lung capacity. Janet herself began to deteriorate emotionally. She expressed fear constantly, often saying she didn't feel like herself, that something was watching her, even inside her own mind. The family tried priests, blessing rituals, and even briefly moving out of the house, but each time something drew them back. The activity would lessen, then escalate. And though critics were vocal, the sheer number of reputable witnesses, from police officers who saw chairs slide across floors to neighbors who heard cries in the night, made it impossible to completely dismiss. The activity would lessen, then escalate. And though critics were vocal, the sheer number of reputable witnesses, from police officers who saw chairs slide across floors to neighbors who heard cries in the night, made it impossible to completely dismiss. Throughout 1978, the Hodgsons lived in a persistent state of dread. There was no schedule to the incidents. Some nights were quiet, others were violent. Janet continued to be the center of activity, with her voice deepening into the guttural tone of Bill Wilkins, the supposed spirit of a man who had died in their house. Bill's voice, at times, would speak for hours. Tape recorders captured him ranting about his death, how he had gone blind and then died in the living room chair. This claim, verified through previous tenancy records, matched the death of an actual man named Bill Wilkins, who had indeed passed away in that same property. Skeptics argued Janet might have overheard it somewhere or guessed, but no conclusive proof of fabrication ever emerged. What continued to bother researchers was the consistency and strength of the voice. A vocal frequency analysis concluded the voice was being produced at a level beyond what an 11-year-old could sustain without damaging her vocal cords. Meanwhile, the house itself began to show signs of wear under the strain of these unexplained events. Furniture moved on its own. Cold spots hovered in rooms even during warm months. Wall knockings began to follow patterns, responding in sequence to questions. Investigators began testing it, asking it to knock once for yes, twice for no. It responded as though intelligent. Janet was filmed being flung from her bed on multiple occasions with no visible wires or external interference. One photo, published widely, showed her mid-air, but skeptics argued she had simply jumped. Still, other photos and witness testimonies from reporters and police remained harder to explain. During one incident, the family's fireplace ripped itself out of the wall and flew across the room. A neighbor, Mrs. Nottingham, corroborated hearing the crash and rushed over, only to find the family visibly shaken and the heavy iron frame embedded in the opposite wall. Peggy Hodgson, the mother, began suffering from anxiety and sleeplessness. She told investigators she often felt watched, followed, even inside her own home. Items vanished and reappeared in odd places, cups on bookshelves, clothing hanging from ceiling lights. On one occasion, a heavy dresser blocked the bedroom door from inside, trapping the children. No one could explain how it had moved, as no one was in the room at the time. Reporters from the Daily Mirror, who had spent days observing the family, also claimed to witness a chair flip itself upside down and a Lego brick fly across the room, striking a photographer in the eye. This wasn't entertainment, this wasn't hysteria. These were grown men, professionals, shaken and unwilling to return. The Society for Psychical Research maintained its presence, with Maurice Grosse leading most of the fieldwork. Grosse had lost his own daughter in a tragic motorcycle accident, and some speculated he saw in Janet a kind of surrogate or projection. But Grosse's notes remained disciplined, structured, and clinical. He noted times, temperatures, the precise angles at which objects were displaced. He used equipment, cameras, sound recorders, even motion sensors. During one of these sessions, he recorded what appeared to be a knocking sound that circled the room, even though no one had moved. Other experts from various universities were invited to observe. Some left convinced, others remained skeptical, but nearly all admitted something strange was happening. Janet's episodes worsened. She began entering trance-like states, waking up in different rooms with no memory of how she got there. She claimed she felt taken over, sometimes by
more than one entity. During one chilling episode, she levitated in her bedroom, landing in a heap several feet away.
This was witnessed not just by family, but by a visiting social worker and a local lollipop man who happened to be walking by and saw her suspended in the window. Then came the pillow incident. Investigators left a pillow marked with tape on the bed, shut the door, sealed it with paper, and waited. Upon returning, the paper seal remained intact, but the pillow was across the room, under the dresser. They repeated the experiment several times. Each time, the object relocated while the seal remained untouched. There was also the curtain, strangulation. Janet was found gasping and clawing at the thick bedroom curtain, which had wrapped tightly around her neck. She later said she remembered nothing, only that she felt dragged by her throat. Doctors began to worry about psychological damage, but again, nothing medically abnormal could explain the power and precision of what was being reported. Even during psychiatric evaluations which ruled out schizophrenia or possession, the occurrences didn't stop. In fact, in some cases they increased. Furniture would rattle inside the waiting room. Lights would flicker in the building when Janet arrived. Still, not everyone was convinced. During an unguarded moment, Janet was caught bending spoons herself. When confronted, she admitted she had tried to fake some things to test if the investigators would notice. This admission gave skeptics ammunition, saying the whole case was a hoax. But Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair remained adamant. Yes, a child under intense pressure might try to control her situation by staging some events, but this did not explain the rest. You cannot fake being thrown across a room while under 24-hour surveillance. You cannot fake the thermal drops, electromagnetic spikes, or the pounding in the walls that everyone heard. Playfair even wrote in his book, This House is Haunted, that the hoax theory was far less believable than the idea that something truly paranormal had occurred. The case gained international attention. Even the famed American demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the Hodgson home, though briefly. Lorraine later described the presence as inhuman, saying she felt it as soon as she crossed the threshold. Though their involvement was limited in comparison to Grosse and Playfair, the Warrens' presence linked the case to a wider pattern of supposed demonic activity they documented across multiple countries. Meanwhile, the Hodgson family simply wanted peace. They tried moving out, but financial hardship kept bringing them back. Janet was now entering her teens. The poltergeist activity began to fade by late 1979, but not entirely. It never stopped. It simply became less frequent. Janet eventually left home, married, and had children. In interviews decades later, she admitted some embarrassment over the case, but insisted most of it had been real. Her mother, Peggy, stayed in the house until her death. Tenants afterward reported strange feelings, sounds in the night, and objects moving, but nothing to the violent extremes of the 1970s-79 period. Still, the story left a permanent mark. Researchers called it one of the most well-documented poltergeist cases in modern history. And, to this day, no one has fully explained what happened in that small council house in Enfield. Some say it was grief. Family trauma manifested into a psychological storm. Others say it was all a trick. But then there are those, the reporters, the police officers, the investigators, who saw it with their own eyes, and they still believe.